I used to think loneliness looked obvious, like empty apartments, microwave dinners, people staring out bus windows with headphones on. Turns out it looks a lot quieter than that. It looks like opening your phone at 1 in the morning and rereading a text you never answered because too much time passed. It looks like sitting in your friend's driveway for an extra minute after dropping him off, just so you don't have to walk into your apartment yet. It looks like recognizing the same cashier at the grocery store and feeling relieved when she says, "Hey, stranger," like she actually noticed you were gone. Most Thursdays, I ended up at this small coffee shop near campus after class. Not because the coffee was good, it tasted burned half the time, but because nobody expected anything from me there. The place had scratched wooden tables and a clock above the counter that ticked louder than it should have. Every time the door opened, cold air pushed through the room and rattled the napkin holder beside the sugar packets. I usually sat by the window, laptop open, earbuds in, not listening to anything. That's where I saw her the first time. Well, not the first time. I'd met Daniel's mom before, obviously. A few quick hellos picking him up for basketball or helping him move apartments last summer. But parents always existed in this blurry background space to me, like furniture with opinions. Then one Thursday, she walked into the coffee shop carrying a folded umbrella and rubbing her shoulder like the rain had made it ache. And somehow she became a person. "Your usual?" the cashier asked her. She smiled a little. "You say that like I should be embarrassed." "You should," he said. She laughed softly. I remember that part because it didn't sound forced. Most people laugh half a second too late, like they're paying rent on the conversation. Hers just happened. She noticed me when she turned with her cup. "Oh," she said. "Ethan, right?" I pulled one earbud out. "Yeah, Daniel's friend. Depends what he told you." That got another small laugh from her. Quieter this time. She wore a dark coat damp from the rain, and there were silver strands in her hair she didn't seem interested in hiding. Mid-40s maybe. Older than my mom by a little. Pretty in a way that didn't seem arranged for anyone. That was the dangerous part, I think. She sat 2 tables over. Not with me. Just near enough that I could hear pages turning in her book every few minutes. I kept pretending to work while noticing things I shouldn't have been noticing. The way she wrapped both hands around the coffee cup before drinking. The way she stared out the window too long sometimes, like she forgot where she was for a second. At one point she caught me looking. Not my face. My hands. I'd been folding the corner of a napkin over and over without realizing it. "You're going to disintegrate that thing," she said. I looked down. "Probably." "You nervous about something?" "Not specifically." "Worst kind," she murmured. Then she went back to reading. That should have been the end of it. But after that, Thursdays turned into this strange little routine where we'd accidentally be there at the same time. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes we didn't. She remembered my order before the cashier did. Vanilla cold brew. She'd say if I was still checking my wallet. Black coffee. I'd answer when she walked in late. It became normal too quickly, which is probably why it scared me. One night, Daniel invited me over to help him set up his new TV. He disappeared halfway through to take a work call upstairs, leaving me alone in the kitchen with his mom while pasta boiled quietly on the stove. There was rain tapping against the windows again. She leaned against the counter and looked at me for a second too long. "You always seem like you're about to say something," she said. I laughed once. "Do I?" "Yeah." I looked down at the dish towel in my hands, folding it carefully even though it was already folded. Then her phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at it, smiled faintly, and slid it toward me. It was a text from Daniel. "Mom, be nice to him. He already looks terrified around you." She looked back at me after that, not laughing anymore, and somehow the room felt smaller than it had a minute ago. After that night, I started noticing how careful we both became. Not distant, just precise. Like we were walking around something neither of us wanted to name too early. Daniel never noticed. Or if he did, he hid it well. He still invited me over for games, beer, late-night takeout. And his mom, Clare, moved through the apartment like she always had. Calm, dry sense of humor. Reading glasses sliding down her nose while she paid bills at the kitchen counter. But now every interaction felt outlined somehow. Too visible. One Sunday afternoon, Daniel left halfway through helping me install shelves in my apartment Because his boss called him in unexpectedly. "Mom's dropping off the drill charger," he said on his way out. "Don't die trying to be a handyman." An hour later, Claire knocked on my door holding the charger against her hip. "You're bleeding," she said immediately. I looked at my hand. A thin cut across my knuckle. "It's barely anything." She stepped inside anyway. My apartment suddenly looked painfully temporary through her eyes. Laundry chair. Half-dead plant near the window. 3 unopened letters on the counter. She noticed all of it without commenting. That somehow felt worse. "You have bandages?" she asked. I opened a drawer. "Forks. Receipts. Batteries." "Nope. Of course not." There was a small smile under the words. She cleaned the cut at my sink while I stood there feeling strangely 16 and 30 at the same time. "You always this bad at taking care of yourself?" she asked. "I eat vegetables sometimes." That wasn't my question. I watched her hands while she wrapped the bandage carefully around my knuckle. No jewelry except a thin silver ring on her right hand. Not a wedding ring anymore. Just the ghost of one. I shouldn't have asked, but I did anyway. "How long were you married?" Her hands paused for half a second. 21 years. That's... I stopped. "Long." "Yeah." She leaned back against the counter after finishing, crossing her arms loosely. "He left quietly," she said, "which almost makes it worse." I didn't know what to say to that. The refrigerator hummed between us. Outside, somebody dragged a trash bin across pavement. "I'm sorry," I said finally. She shrugged one shoulder. "It was a long time ago." But she said it the way people talk about storms that technically passed while still checking the sky. Then she looked around my apartment again. "You know what your problem is." That's a dangerous opening sentence. "You live like you're planning on leaving." I laughed softly, but it hit somewhere uncomfortable because I knew exactly what she meant. No framed photos. No real furniture. Nothing that suggested permanence. Just a place to sleep between days. Claire walked to the crooked shelf I'd been trying to install and pressed it lightly with her fingertips. "It tilts left," she said. Story of my life. That got an actual laugh out of her this time. Warm. Tired. For a second, neither of us moved. And that was the thing slowly undoing me. Not flirtation, not fantasy. Just these tiny suspended moments where silence stopped feeling empty. I started imagining things after that. Her sitting across from me at breakfast in an apartment that actually looked lived in. Her books beside my couch. Her reading while I worked. Small, dangerous thoughts that arrived quietly and stayed too long. I hated myself a little for it. Not because she was older, not even because she was Daniel's mom, but because every time she looked at me directly, I had the terrifying feeling she could already see the version of me I was trying not to become. Before she left, she reached for my injured hand again. "Try not to destroy the other one," she said. Her thumb brushed lightly against my wrist as she let go. Tiny gesture. Barely there. Still, after the door closed behind her, I stood in the kitchen for a long time staring at that bandage like it meant something more than it did. Maybe because I already knew it did. Things changed after the bandage. Not outwardly. That was the problem. If something dramatic had happened, maybe I could have dealt with it properly. Embarrassed myself. Apologized. Put distance between us. Instead, everything stayed subtle enough to deny. Claire still asked if I wanted coffee when I came over. Still teased me for how badly I folded pizza boxes. Still looked at me the same way sometimes. Steady, thoughtful, like she was listening to something underneath the conversation. But she also started disappearing more. Not literally. Just enough to make me notice. If Daniel and I were watching a game in the living room, she'd say goodnight earlier than before. If we crossed paths in the kitchen, she'd keep things shorter. Lighter. Careful again. Like she regretted letting things feel too familiar. And stupidly, that hurt more than it should have. One Thursday, I went to the coffee shop after class and caught myself looking toward the door every few minutes. She never came. I stirred melting ice around my cup for almost an hour before realizing how pathetic that probably looked. The next week she was there again. Reading. Like nothing had changed. "You vanished," I said before I could stop myself. Her eyes lifted slowly from the page. That sounded accusatory. It wasn't. A little bit. She smiled faintly, but it faded quickly. I was busy. There was space after that sentence. Not empty exactly. Just unfinished. I nodded like I understood. I didn't. She watched me fold my straw wrapper into smaller and smaller pieces. You do that when you're anxious too, she said quietly. What? Your hands. I looked down immediately. Sorry, Ethan. Her voice softened a little. You don't have to apologize for existing in a room. That should have made me feel better. Instead, it made something tighten painfully in my chest. Because people don't usually notice those things unless they've been paying attention for a while. A couple days later, Daniel noticed something too. We were carrying groceries upstairs to his apartment when he glanced sideways at me. You and my mom becoming best friends or something. My grip tightened slightly on the paper bag. What? You just talk more now. He shrugged. It's weird. Not bad weird. Just weird. I laughed too fast. Yeah, well, she's easy to talk to. That was all he said. Still, the rest of the night I couldn't relax properly. Every glance felt dangerous after that. Every silence louder. Later, while Daniel showered before we went out, Claire stood at the kitchen sink rinsing tea mugs. I should have stayed in the living room. Instead, I stayed there beside her, drying dishes that were already dry. You okay? She asked without looking at me. Yeah. You seem quiet. I'm usually quiet. Not with me. The water kept running softly between us. Then she turned the faucet off. Silence settled immediately, thick enough to notice. I think maybe we should, she started. But she didn't finish. I looked at her then. Really looked. Loose hair falling around her face. Sleeves pushed to her elbows. Tired eyes that somehow still felt warm when they landed on me. And for one reckless second, I thought she might say it too. Whatever this thing was. Her gaze dropped briefly to my mouth before she caught herself. Tiny movement. Barely there. Still enough to make my pulse stumble. I stepped closer without meaning to. Not even a full step. Just enough that I could smell the tea on her skin. Claire inhaled sharply. Ethan, my name sounded fragile coming from her. Then the bathroom door opened down the hall. Just like that, she moved back. Quickly. Efficiently. Picking up a towel like that had been the only thing happening. And maybe that was the worst part. How easily the moment disappeared on the surface. While underneath, I knew something had already crossed anyway. After that night in the kitchen, Claire started avoiding being alone with me entirely. Not obviously, just with enough intention that I couldn't pretend not to notice. If Daniel left the room, she suddenly remembered laundry downstairs. Phone calls, emails, anything. And I told myself it was good, necessary, healthy probably. Still, every time she disappeared, something ugly twisted in my chest. Not anger exactly. Worse, rejection mixed with embarrassment. Like I'd imagined the whole thing, and she was trying to gently return me to reality. Then Daniel made the mistake of inviting people over for drinks on a Friday night. A few coworkers. Loud music. Cheap beers sweating onto coffee tables. I almost didn't go. But around 10, Claire came home from somewhere wearing a dark sweater and gold earrings I'd never seen before, and suddenly I couldn't focus on anything else in the room. That terrified me, because everyone else kept acting normal. Daniel arguing about basketball. Somebody laughing too hard in the kitchen. Ice rattling into cups. Meanwhile, I was noticing Claire pushing hair behind her ear while talking to one of Daniel's friends from work. A guy maybe her age. Confident. Easy smile. At one point he touched her arm while telling a story. Small gesture. Completely harmless. I looked away so fast it almost gave me a headache. That's when I realized how bad it had gotten. Not attraction anymore. Something heavier. Possessive in this quiet, humiliating way I didn't recognize in myself. I ended up outside on the apartment building's back steps just to breathe for a minute. Cold air. Distant traffic. Someone's TV glowing blue through another window. A few minutes later, the door opened behind me. Claire, thought I'd find you out here, she said softly. I stared out at the parking lot. Needed air. She sat beside me, leaving careful space between us. Too careful. Inside, music muffled against the walls. You've been avoiding me, I said before I could stop myself. Her shoulders stiffened slightly. No, I haven't. You have. She rubbed her hands together slowly against the cold. I think maybe we forgot how this looks. There it was. Finally. I laughed once under my breath, but there wasn't any humor in it. To who? That's not the point. Then what is? Claire didn't answer immediately. She just looked tired suddenly, more honest than I'd ever seen her. When you're my age, she said quietly, you start learning how quickly people can ruin good things by wanting too much from them. The words landed harder than they probably should have. Because part of me heard, you're too young. You don't understand this. You'll leave eventually too. I'm not a kid, I said. I know. Then stop talking to me like this is some phase I'm gonna wake up from. She looked down at her hands after that. Long silence. I watched her thumb rub against the side of her coffee cup. Back and forth. Nervous movement. First time I'd ever seen her lose composure a little. You think I don't know what's happening? She asked finally. My heartbeat stumbled. Neither of us moved. Inside, someone shouted at the television. A burst of laughter followed. Out here, everything felt strangely still. Claire turned toward me slowly. I see the way you look at me, she said. Her voice almost broke on the last word. And the worst part is, she stopped. Pressed her lips together briefly. Tried again. The worst part is I wait for it. Something inside me gave way then. All the restraint. All the carefulness. I turned toward her fully. Close enough now to see the uncertainty in her expression. The fear too. Not fear of me. Fear of herself. My hand moved before I could think better of it, resting lightly against the bench beside hers. Close. Not touching. Yet. Claire's eyes dropped to my mouth again. Same tiny glance as before. But this time she didn't look away immediately. And in the silence between us, only one question remained. Who was going to stop this first? The next morning, Claire texted me. Hope you got home okay. That was it. No mention of the bench. No mention of the way we'd looked at each other like something had already happened when technically nothing had. I stared at the message for a long time before replying. Yeah, you too. After that, everything collapsed quietly. No fight. No confrontation. Just absence. She stopped coming to the coffee shop entirely. At first I told myself it was temporary. Busy schedule. Work. Life. Then 2 weeks passed. The barista eventually asked, "Your friend okay?" I pretended not to know who he meant. Meanwhile, Daniel acted completely normal. Too normal. He still invited me over, but now Claire was always out with friends, or visiting her sister, or already asleep. Every excuse sounded prepared in advance. And stupidly, I kept showing up anyway. Like maybe one night she'd walk into the kitchen and look at me the way she had on that bench. Like maybe we'd finish the sentence. Instead, I got fragments. One evening, I arrived early and heard voices through the partially open balcony door. Claire and Daniel. I wasn't trying to listen. Then I heard my name. He's a good person, Claire was saying softly. I know, Daniel answered. A pause. Then, you don't have to sound guilty saying that. Something in my chest tightened instantly. I should have walked away then. Made noise. Let them know I was there. Instead, I stood frozen beside the hallway wall like a teenager overhearing his parents fight. Claire sighed quietly. I'm just tired, Daniel. Of what? Another pause. Starting over. The words hit strangely hard because they didn't sound dramatic. Just exhausted. Daniel said something lower this time. I only caught pieces. Dad calling again. You should at least think about it. Then the balcony door slid shut. I moved away before either of them came inside. The rest of the night, Claire barely looked at me. And suddenly I understood. Not fully, but enough. Her ex-husband was back somehow. Or trying to be. 21 years doesn't disappear cleanly just because papers get signed. That realization should have made things easier. Instead, it made me feel ridiculous. Like I'd mistaken loneliness for connection. Timing for fate. A few days later, I stopped going to the coffee shop too. Petty maybe. Or self-preservation. I wasn't sure anymore. My Thursdays became empty again. Apartment. Campus. Microwave dinners. Long showers for no reason. I caught myself checking my phone constantly anyway. Nothing from her. One night around midnight, Daniel sent me a meme about some terrible movie we'd watched together. I reacted to it and almost typed, "How's your mom?" I deleted it immediately. A week later, I saw Claire by accident at the grocery store. Frozen food aisle. Ordinary enough to hurt. She looked surprised to see me. Then careful right after. Hey, she said softly. Hey. For a second it felt like we might actually talk. Instead, an older man turned the corner with a shopping basket in his hand. Tall. Gray at the temples. Familiar enough that I knew immediately who he was. Her ex. He touched Claire lightly at the back as he passed her. Casual. Practiced. My stomach dropped in this dull, heavy way. Claire opened her mouth like she wanted to explain something, or maybe stop me from misunderstanding. But I was already stepping backward. I should go, I said. Ethan, it's okay. I smiled when I said it. That was the worst part. Because she smiled back automatically, like neither of us believed me, but we both appreciated the effort. That night, I typed out a message around 2 in the morning. I miss talking to you. Simple. Honest. I stared at it until the screen dimmed in my hand. Then I locked the phone without sending it. And somehow that felt sadder than rejection would have. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused. Like life forgot to finish the sentence. 3 weeks passed before I saw her again. Not accidentally this time. She called me. Actually called. I almost didn't answer because I thought it would be easier that way. Cleaner. But her name stayed vibrating on my screen while I stood in the laundry room of my apartment building holding a warm towel against my chest like an idiot. So I answered. Hey. A pause. Then Claire's voice, quieter than usual. Hi. The dryers hummed loudly around me. You okay? I asked. Yeah. She exhaled softly. Daniel's out of town for work. I made too much soup. I laughed under my breath before I could stop myself. That's your excuse. It's the best one I had on short notice. Another pause. Then, you don't have to come. Which, somehow, sounded exactly like please come. So an hour later, I was standing at her apartment door with cold hands and absolutely no idea what I was doing. Claire opened the door wearing socks and an oversized gray sweater. No makeup. Hair tied back loosely like she'd given up fixing it halfway through. She looked tired. Not bad tired. Real tired. Hey, she said again. Hey. The apartment smelled like garlic and onions simmered too long. Familiar. Warm. Dangerous. She handed me a bowl in the kitchen, and we ate mostly in silence at first, spoons clinking lightly against ceramic while rain tapped against the windows again. Always rain somehow. You disappeared, she said eventually. I looked down at the soup. So did you. Fair. Her hands wrapped around her tea mug after that. Same way they always did. I hated how much relief I felt just sitting there again. Claire stared toward the window for a long moment before speaking. He wants to try again. I knew immediately who she meant. Oh, that's what I said. I nodded slowly. And she gave a small shrug that didn't mean anything. That's the problem. I don't know. The honesty in her voice unsettled me more than certainty would have, because now there was no villain, no dramatic betrayal, just two tired people with history trying to decide whether history was enough reason to stay. Claire looked at me carefully then. I saw your message, she said. My stomach dropped. I never sent one. You typed it anyway. I blinked, then realized. The grocery store. I must have opened my phone before putting it away. The text still sitting there unsent on the screen. Heat rushed into my face instantly. Claire, I know. Her voice softened. And suddenly, all the restraint I'd been holding together for weeks started slipping. I tried not to do this, I admitted quietly. Whatever this is. She looked down at her mug. So did I. Silence settled between us again. Not awkward this time. Just exposed. I rubbed my thumb against the edge of the bowl, trying to steady myself. I don't need this to become some huge thing, I said finally. I'm not asking you to blow up your life. Claire's eyes lifted slowly to mine. But the word barely came out. I swallowed hard. But when you stopped talking to me, I laughed once under my breath. It felt worse than it should have. Her expression changed at that. Small, painfully human, like she'd been carrying the exact same sentence around alone. Then she stood and walked around the kitchen counter slowly until she was beside me. Not rushing, not dramatic, just close enough that I could feel warmth from her sleeve against my arm. I don't know what happens next, she said. Okay. I'm serious, Ethan. I know. She studied my face for another long second, like she was checking whether I understood the risk before stepping toward it. Then her hand found mine quietly on the counter. No speeches, no promises. Just her fingers resting there, warm and uncertain. And after everything, that felt more honest than certainty ever could. Nothing changed all at once after that night in Claire's kitchen. That probably saved us. If we'd rushed into something dramatic, I think it would have collapsed under the weight of itself. Too many questions. Too many people to hurt. Too much reality sitting quietly in the corners waiting to be acknowledged. So instead, life moved slowly. Carefully. Her ex-husband stopped calling eventually. Not because of me, I don't think. More because Claire had already spent enough years trying to make herself smaller for someone else's comfort. Daniel found out months later. Not through some explosive confession. Just accumulation. The way I stayed after everyone else left. The way Claire smiled differently when I walked into a room. The fact that Thursdays somehow belonged to both of us now. He took it badly for about a week. Then medium badly. Then one night he sighed during a basketball game and said, honestly, Mom's happier. Which is annoying because now I can't even fully hate you. That was probably the closest thing to approval we were ever going to get. And weirdly, it was enough. By winter, Claire started leaving books at my apartment without mentioning it. A sweater over the back of my couch. Tea bags in my kitchen cabinet because apparently my coffee habits were psychologically concerning. You drink black coffee like you're punishing yourself, she told me once. You drink tea like a retired librarian. That's because I have range. I laughed so hard I nearly spilled soup on the floor. Small moments like that became the structure of things. Not fireworks. Not certainty. Just repetition turning into trust. Sometimes we still went to the coffee shop near campus. Same scratch tables. Same loud clock ticking above the counter. The cashier eventually stopped pretending not to notice us. Claire still wrapped both hands around her cup before drinking. I still folded napkins absent-mindedly when I got nervous. Some habits survive love, I guess. One rainy Thursday, almost a year after everything started, we ended up sitting on the same apartment bench where things had nearly fallen apart. The wood was cold beneath us. Cars hissed softly through wet streets nearby. Claire leaned against my shoulder without thinking about it first. That was new. Not the closeness. The lack of fear around it. You know, she said quietly. I almost never came to that coffee shop. I looked at her. Seriously. MHM. My therapist suggested I stop isolating after the divorce. That's the most therapist sentence ever. She smiled against my shoulder. I hated it there at first. But you kept going. I noticed this sad-looking guy by the window every Thursday. She glanced up at me. Felt irresponsible to leave him unattended. I laughed softly. Then the silence settled in again. Comfortable now. The kind that doesn't need managing. And maybe that was the biggest difference between loneliness and love. Not intensity. Not obsession. Just having someone you could be quiet with without feeling invisible. Claire reached for my hand then. Fingers sliding naturally between mine like they already knew the way. No drama left in it. Just warmth. Down the street. The coffee shop lights flickered on against the rain-dark evening. And for a second, I remembered the version of myself who used to sit alone by the window pretending not to wait for anyone. Funny how life changes. Not suddenly. Not cleanly. Just enough that one day you look up and realize someone stayed. And somehow, that becomes everything. Did this story stay with you? What kind of quiet, real love stories do you want to hear next?